I wanted to show you guys how I bend guitar sides and how I built some of my jigs. It's important to understand when you're bending wood, what you're doing and how you're going to do it, and kind of have a plan of action. Bending wood is actually really easy if you've got the right tools set up. What's difficult is if you really don't know what you're doing. You do a couple examples, you learn by making some mistakes, and you go. I bought a heating blanket and I built some of these jigs to bend my guitar sides, and I've had some really good success in doing that. I feel like the learning curve was not that steep, but what's important is I had the jig set up correctly and I had the right tools. So I did invest in a heating blanket, in some steel sides, and I spent the time to build the jig correctly. And building the jig is probably the easiest thing you could do. Is you get the guitar sides, you trace this out, and then you take your little aluminum rods or steel rods or whatnot, and you want to set them in about 1/4 inch into the guitar mold, so that way as you're bending, the wood always has a little bit of snapback, that if you bend a little bit more, it's easier to get everything placed when you have the snapback. From there, as you build the jigs, it's got a stable base, it's got 3 stiffening blocks in here as well, and it's also got some spring clamps to hold down the sides as I get going. Then for what I did here is I just have a basic cutout block, and I use a clamp here to clamp down as I'm going. In my other jig, for my cutout, and the reason I built 2 jigs, because I didn't know I was going to do a cutout. This is the second jig. So this jig's actually a lot better. The spaces on the inside are better, and it's much harder to go across the bend and the cutout. So this jig helps me get the perfect cutout bend. And it's really nice, it's really easy to move. All these parts were recycled. This was a neck template that I cut out incorrectly. I bought the screw clamp, and then I've got a lot of just free wood to help build the jigs. These were actually shelving units that I tore apart and used. But essentially, as I'm bending this down, you get everything set up, and you kind of just slowly push the wood in. And this one takes a little bit longer than the other jig. But same process, just as good. So I'm going to show you how I bend in the straight jig with no cutout, and walk you through my process here. Alright, so let's bend some wood. How do we start? I've got my 2 pieces of wood, flame maple, that I resawed on the bandsaw and sanded down to about 0.08 or 0.09 thick, depending on how thick you want your sides. When you're bending in the cutout, if you're doing a cutout guitar, it's easier if you have thinner wood, and if you're doing a single or a non-cutaway guitar, you can have the wood a little bit thicker. This is about 0.06, I think, with my calipers I measured. We're going to do 1 piece at a time. You always want to make sure that you've got the book matched pieces. If you're doing a book match, these pieces aren't book matched because they're from 2 different pieces of wood. We get the spray bottle. Some aluminum foil, and we want to spray down the sides, on both sides. Spray down here on both sides. Make sure the water's everywhere. You just want to get a good coating of water. You don't want to really saturate it, but you want to make sure you've got a nice coating. You want to fold this up, like a present. What I like to do is make sure my ends are sticking out on each side, so that way I know the exact of where I'm putting the exact piece on the jig. Get the jig set up. I'm going to undo my springs. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the tinfoil wrap wood into the, make a nice little tinfoil sandwich here. Now I'm going to get this lined up, and that's where the most important piece is, to make sure that on my jig, can't see it on this side, but on my jig I have a straight line so I know where the edges are. Alright, so here now I've got the heating blanket set up, and I've got my clamp on the edge, on the back edge there, so I can clamp the aluminum sandwich with a piece of wood in with the heating blanket. And I've got my spring clamp set up now. Essentially just going to pop this into the hole here. It's got, you can see the wood still got a significant amount of spring. I'm going to go ahead and plug in the heating blanket, and the heating blanket's got a rheostat on it, and I've got it set to the middle, so medium heat, which I think is about 200 something degrees. And you'll watch as the wood starts to get hot, and as this whole heating blanket gets hot, I've got some flex now in the wood. And so what I'll do is I'll just let this start to heat up, get my block, and I'll get my clamp, and I'll just kind of let this sit here for a second, and I'll begin to just let the wood heat up. I would advise wearing gloves when you're doing this. It does get hot, and you do got some sharp edges with the aluminum sheets there. So as the wood gets hot, you begin to just force down that little block for the cutaway. What I do with the clamp here is I kind of just, get the clamp set up, get a little bit of spring back into the wood, force it down here, and what I'll do now is I'll back the clamp up and lower the jig so it sits perfectly. So now I've got the clamp fully extended, got the wood bent a little bit. I'm going to back the clamp back out here, get the clamping block set up correctly. So now I've got a little bit of some spring. And I'll force the clamp down here. Now everything's positioned correctly. And just clamp this down. For me, I didn't put the clamp on the overhead piece here because I didn't want to buy another screw clamp. This works okay. It's a little bit clumsy, but it works out pretty well. So now I've got the top of the guitar set up correctly, and now I'm going to unclamp. So now I've repositioned the camera to give you a better view of this back, the back side of the guitar. So I set the springs in, use that same screw. Got my other screw clamp here. Essentially just slowly force this down. Make sure you've got the proper bend. And now go ahead and I'll put the spring clamps on. Now what I'll do is I'll take a rag, or if you've got a glove on, you just push down the wood to make sure it's sitting in the right spot. You don't want any bubbles or pop-ups there that you see. I just take my hand and push down the wood so I know that it's sitting in the right channel. That's why you want to really make sure that you've got that 1/4 inch off the jig so you can have the wood sit in the right spot. People will put more clamps down, but I'm pretty good with these two. Just make sure everything's set up. What I'll do is I'll leave the heater on for 20 minutes, and then I'll unplug it, and I'll leave the wood in the jig for about 24 hours, and that's all you really need, and you've got a pretty nice bent side. Alright, so here we are, probably more like 8 hours later. I'll go ahead and take off the springs, unclamp this. Get this out of the way. And now here you go. There's a nice there's the nice bent side. I'm going to use the steel slats. You get a nice bend the whole way around. You don't get any folds in the wood, which is a big pain. It's nice and level, so when I put this in the jig, I won't have any issues. Surprisingly, there's still some water left I guess I could have probably let this run a little bit longer, but now essentially I got half a guitar. What I'll do is I'll line this up on my jig and I'll end up cutting so that way I can get this to fit correctly.